Okay, so I want to talk about this idea that we've got an aging population, but the aging population doesn't only mean that we have to provide more resources for people as they get older, and healthcare and aged care is has to keep growing, which they do. But also that as we are aging, as we're getting chronologically older, we don't necessarily have to be aging in the same way that our bodies have aged in the past. So I want to talk about what that means for us as a society, and what it means for you in your business, and from a professional sense as well. And you might get some ideas here for you for your personal life, and that's great. And I want to specifically focus on your professional life. So to start with, I'm going to ask a very rude question. So the question I'm going to ask you is this: how old are you? Now, I'm not going to ask you to write in the question box. Don't type your answers in there. What I'm going to ask you to do is complete this poll. So I've got a poll here. So let me share the poll question, and I'll try not to be too rude about it. So let me launch the poll. So typically, you can fall into one of these five generations, and I've given you, based on a current year, which of these generations would you fall into based on your age. So we'll see, and I think I can pretty much guess where people are going to be. And great, thank you for everyone for voting. So let me just share the results here. Okay, so interestingly here, it's actually turned out to be 50-50, so half and half in the room, either Gen X or baby boomers. So that's not surprising, except that the one thing that you typically find in my webinar audiences and conference audiences is I quite often get a whole bunch of Gen Ys as well, so the millennials, who are as you can see there, like 25 to 40 age group. But now we've got in this room Generation X and baby boomers. So I'll come back to that later to show you what the significance of that is, but it's going to be relevant to us a little bit later on. Okay, so the point I want to make is that people at the moment fall into one of these five generations, but that may no longer be the case in the future. So in the future, we may have lots and lots of other different generations of people. And this is putting this back into professional context. Let me talk about what that means for us in our businesses and in our organizations, and for us as leaders. So I talk about the fact that there's a lot of disruption happening in the world. And if you think about those disruptors, they fall into six categories. And if you think about it like climbing a mountain, you can think that if on the way up you can see the peak, and it may be hard to get up there, but at least you can see what's coming. Whereas if you are on the other side, you can't see what's around the other side. So the first three disruptors are things that are happening as you're going up the mountain: the competitors, dominators, and startups. And on the other side of the mountain are the other three disruptors, which are the upstarts, the randoms, and the terminators. And I just want to give you a very brief overview of each of these six, and then we're going to talk about this life extension science, which falls into that terminators category. So let me tell you briefly what they are. So competitors are your standard competitors, so the people you're fighting with for market share. So you know that you've got competitors in your business, in your industry. The dominators are people who come in and take over an industry, like Amazon's just moved into Australia and doing retail in Australia now. It may be when Google moves into banking, or Facebook moves into real estate, or when government regulation changes and it affects the entire industry. The startups, we know what startups are. They're smart, agile companies that don't necessarily have the resources that established companies do, but they also don't have some of the baggage that established companies do. And so they look around to see what they can do and create world's best practice. One of my favorite examples is this. If you want to do an ECG, you no longer need to go to a GP or a cardiologist. You can get this little device that you attach to your iPhone, and you can do an ECG yourself to measure the health of your heart. And that data gets sent to a remote monitoring center. And in fact, the company that creates this, AliveCore, they offer this free to their patients, because they know that the data they collect are more valuable than charging money for this service. So that has really disrupted something that used to be something that required a lot of expertise, and that people charge a lot of money for. The upstarts are like startups, except that they can play outside the rules. So the Airbnbs and the Ubers of the world, they come in and they disrupt industries, and they disrupt industries by sometimes even doing things that aren't legal initially. But they provide such a compelling experience that the governments and societies decide to legalize them, to bring them on board, because they realize that they're offering a solution that people want, that customers want. But it seems a bit unfair, because if you're operating within the rules, it seems like it's an unfair playing field. But that's life. The randoms are the people who disrupt you without even trying to disrupt you, or even without thinking about you. One example that I often talk about is that my AIA Vitality insurance, so AIA is my insurer for trauma and TPD insurance, I think. But part of my insurance with AIA gives me membership with their Vitality program, and part of that means that I get a 10% discount on all Qantas bookings, or at least they give me a 10% refund, cash back on all Qantas bookings, which for me, because I travel a lot, that's quite significant. But if you think about what AIA is doing, they're not really disrupting airlines, and certainly insurance companies aren't being disrupted, because they're all offering these sort of perks. But if you think about the travel agencies, they often operate at much smaller margins than 10%, and then suddenly they're being disrupted by this random company who doesn't really care about travel, but all they're doing is offering a perk to their members to try and increase their own membership, but they're disrupting a completely separate industry. And the last one are the terminators. This is technology or trends that disrupt and almost completely terminate a complete industry, again, without necessarily meaning to. So driverless cars are one really good example. So driverless cars will, of course, disrupt car manufacturing, but it'll disrupt some other industries as well. If you haven't had the chance to be in a driverless car, I think some people like Juliet, who are in Perth, are lucky. We've got driverless car trials here in Perth. So you can go into this little Perth, on the Perth's foreshore, you can get a free ride in this RAC driverless bus. And you can go in there and it just drives up and down the foreshore for about 20 minutes. Now, at the moment, they have an operator in there with a joystick and a big red panic button in case anything goes wrong. But I've done it and nothing went wrong. And you can get the experience of this driverless technology. But the point I want to make here is that it doesn't just disrupt car manufacturing. It disrupts other industries as well. So car insurance just disappears, because you don't need insurance for your car anymore, because you're not responsible for driving it. Parking, the need for parking is drastically reduced, if not completely eliminated, because the car drops you off and doesn't need to park anywhere. It just goes and picks up somebody else. So you don't need parking lanes, you don't need multi-story car parks, and that's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's going to be almost terminated by driverless cars. Certain parts of some of the accommodation will be disrupted, because you may not need to sleep overnight in a hotel if you can be sleeping in your car while it's taking you to your destination. And other industries like accident and emergency, cemeteries, funeral directors, they're going to be affected by it, because driverless cars are already much safer than driving in cars. So there'll be fewer accidents, fewer deaths as a result of driverless cars. So that's an example of a technology that could be a terminator for other industries. So if we look at these six, the three on the left-hand side are the ones that you can see. The three on the right-hand side are the ones that are a little bit harder to see. And the technology I want to talk about today of life extension science is one of these terminators. It's one of these things that's going to affect every industry, and it's not necessarily some competitor coming in and disrupting your industry. It's simply a trend based on this concept called life extension science, which is, as we'll talk about, the fact that our lives are being extended by science. So science is allowing us to live longer. It's not reversing the aging process, because for that you need cosmetics, but it's extending our lives. So I'm going to show you a little bit of, I'm going to do a little bit of number crunching here. So you'll see a few graphs and stats, and then we'll get into some really creative stuff around what that means for you and your business. Okay, so let's look at Australia's population. In terms of our aging, a generation ago, it looked like this. So we had a whole bunch of babies and young people down the bottom of the graph, and not very many older people. That was a generation ago. So now it's bunched up more towards the top. So now we have people at many different age levels, and then the ABS predicts that in 30 years' time, we will have almost an evening out of the population. So we'll have people at lots and lots of different age groups. So no longer do we have this majority of people who are going to be young people. But what if it was even more than that? So is that the best that we can do? That is all this happening, that we've extended life by a little bit, and I'll show you by how much, and is that the best that we can do? And life extension science says no, maybe it's not. So let's have a look at what life expectancy in Australia has been over the last 100 and so years. So if you think about life expectancy in 1890, the average life expectancy, and I've averaged both men and women here, was under 50 years. And now it's round about 82 years. So it's 80 for men, 84 for women. So that's the expected life the life expectancy of somebody who's born today is they're likely to live to between 80 and 85 years. Now, what if science allowed that graph, which has been pretty steady over the last 100 years, to then suddenly exponentially curve upwards? So what if over the next 75 years, we didn't just follow that straight line across here, but we suddenly went exponentially higher? Is it possible that towards the end of this century that people will be living to 200 years, or somebody being born at the end of this century is likely to live for 200 years? Now that sounds like science fiction, but it's not necessarily outside the realms of possibility. It's certainly plausible, because what's happening is that the science is catching up. So science is getting better and better, and for the people who are being born now, the science is going to be increasing faster than they're aging. And so we get to this point which somebody's called escape life velocity, or life escape velocity, where you get to the point where you're moving faster, the science is moving faster than you're aging, which means that theoretically you get to the point where people will live forever. Because not to the point that they're born, the technology isn't there for them to live forever, but as they get older, the technology is getting faster and faster, and so their life is going to keep getting extended over and over and over. But even if you don't think about living forever, just think about the fact that in 100 years' time, maybe people are living to have an expectancy to be living to 200 rather than 85 or 100. And that's significant if you think about what that means. Do you want to live to 200? Now, most people would, their immediate reaction is no, don't, because I already know how bad it is seeing people who are 80 or 90 or 100 years old. But that's not the point. What if you could live to 200 but be as healthy as you are when you are 60 or 70? So physically healthy at the age of 200, but mentally and psychologically you've got a couple of centuries worth of experience and wisdom to draw on, so you can continue, like you can learn for 100, 150 years. So you don't stop learning when you leave school and university, which a lot of people do at the moment, for better or worse, but you continue learning. So what are some of the consequences of this? So let's have a look at some of this. So let's look at a few of these consequences, and I've just picked 5 of them kind of at random. There's many more than these 5, but I just want to give you an idea of what this might mean, and then let me stop and just quickly check for some questions, and then we'll get onto some examples, and I'll give you the chance to do it for yourself as well. So retirement. So what happens to the concept of retirement? Now, the original idea of retirement was based on the average life expectancy in Germany. So when the German chancellor, way back in the 20s or 30s, came up with the concept of retirement, they pegged it based on the life expectancy. So the idea was that you basically work until you're expected to die. And if you beat the odds and you live longer than your life expectancy, then you could retire and then the state would cover you. Now that concept has changed, but what happens if it goes back to that? You imagine that if the life expectancy is 150, people aren't going to be retiring at 55 or 65. It may not make sense for that to happen. So the concept of retirement might change or might disappear altogether, or might go back to where it used to be when it was first introduced. Think about what our population means if people aren't dying. So there's overpopulation, and I've used the term overpopulation, even though it's a bit of a loaded word. Maybe it's under-resourced is a better way of describing it, because we will have a bigger population. Maybe it means that planet Earth can't support that, and we have to look at other planets. Or maybe it means that that we have to have a water world, and that we can't live on land, or maybe we have to colonize other planets or go into space. Think about the idea of accidental deaths. If you do die in a car accident, and when you're 80, it could be considered much more tragic, because you haven't yet even lived half your life. So we now think it's tragic when people die so young, but what if young means anywhere younger than 100? So what are the implications of that? Then we have this idea of multiple generations living together, working together, interacting and engaging with each other. So many more generations than we have at the moment. And what about even a concept like marriage, which we've taken for granted over the last couple of 100 years? What does that mean? So if you meet somebody when you're in your early 20s, does that mean that you should assume that for better or for worse, for as long as you both shall live, should be that you pick the right person for the next 150 years of your life? Maybe marriage will change. Maybe it'll be normal for people to swap partners every 25 to 30 years. So these are quite big questions, and these are some very important ethical and moral and societal questions, but they may be the things that happen when you do have this life extension science and people are living to much longer than they are now. And what's happened so far is that a lot of these things have crept out a little bit. Retirement's a really good example. As I said, retirement was initially designed, the retirement age was based on life expectancy, but as life expectancy has increased, the retirement age hasn't. And now when politicians talk about increasing the retirement age, there's an outrage, because people don't realize that retirement was supposed to be pegged to life expectancy. So, our expectations have changed. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a sec and just quickly check in with you. Just check whether anyone's got any questions, comments, interesting observations. Maybe this is the first time you've come across it. Maybe you've heard about it before. But what do you think? What do you think, based on the idea that in 100 years' time, maybe people will be expected to live to 150, 200 years when they're born? Any questions or comments? Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples of how that could affect different people professionally. So one example, I'm going to choose financial planning, because that's the one that I did a little bit of research into, or a little bit of thinking around, when I wrote that article for the FPA's magazine Money and Life. And the article was Forever Young, and the concept of what does this mean for financial planners if you're doing planning for people's retirement, for their life, for multiple generations. So let me go through some of those consequences, and I'm just going to pick those 5 again. So retirement. Many financial advisors help people plan for retirement, but as I said, if retirement changes, maybe that whole concept changes, and what you're doing for your financial planning may no longer be based around retirement. The idea of overpopulation or under-resourcing. So again, if you think about a financial advisor trying to help people with their money, well, obviously their money needs are going to change depending on the resources they're going to need for longer. It's going to change depending on how they can project into 50 or 80 years into the future, and also being ready for being able to handle whatever the future brings, even if you don't know what that future is going to be. Things like accidental deaths. I'm picking this example again, that again, advisors quite often help their clients with things like insurance. So where you do have insurance, the whole concept of insurance and the different insurances that advisors are giving clients will change because of the consequences of people dying young, or people dying in accidents, of how society will change to reduce the chances of people dying from diseases, because as I said, it could be quite tragic when somebody dies at the age of 100, whereas now we say, oh, they lived a good life, but if they're only halfway through their life, then maybe we won't think that way anymore. Multiple generations. So many of the smart financial advisors now are thinking about not only how they advise their clients, but also how they advise their clients' children and grandchildren. So smart financial advisors are thinking about a client, not just a client for life, but also a client's family for life. And that concept is going to change their business model as well. And then again, the idea of marriage. So financial advisors will often help their clients think about what happens, like protect them and make sure that parties are catered for if there are problems in marriage and divorce. But what if the concept of divorce is not something that is the exception, but it becomes the norm and you expect it to be divorced every 25 or 30 years? Then of course that's going to affect the way that you do your planning and the way that you look after your money. So that's an example. That's one example. I'm going to ask you to do the same for yourself. One other example for me, so as a conference speaker, I often speak to audiences which have mixed generations. And at the moment in Australia, most conference audiences fall into three categories or three generations. So one is the baby boomers, and they're roughly about 30, like one third, one third, one third. But baby boomers, and that proportion is reducing. But they're the people who are happy to listen to you at the front of the room, and they'll sit kind of passively with just a little bit of interaction. Gen X, which is my generation, at the moment is the biggest in the conference, in a typical conference audience, but that's going down because Gen Ys are becoming a bigger proportion. They're the people who want interaction, so they won't just be happy sitting there silently. They want group interaction. So they like being group activities. They like breaking up into small groups. Gen Y, which is at the moment about a third but increasing, they're the people who also want to interact, but it's sometimes called the I generation. They want to interact individually, so not only in a group, but they also want their voice heard. So that's why they want things like Twitter, back channels, and the chance to engage on social media for their individual voice to be heard within the conference. So what about you? So what does this mean for you and your business? So I'm going to ask you now, here's a chance for you to put on your thinking caps and think about what this might mean for your business. So I'm going to ask you to think about these 5 areas or any others that could be consequences for your business. And let's do this as an interactive exercise. And I could just ask you to write questions in the question box or write your answer in the question box, but let's do this a little bit more publicly. So let me open up my web browser. Okay, so what I'll ask you to do is just think about any of these 5 areas and what that means for your business. And then if you open up your web browser to askgihan.com, so just open up a web browser window and go to askgihan.com, what that'll give you is a public bulletin board window. So I'll show it to you now. I'll show you what I've got. Let me share my window here. Okay, so if you think about, and we don't have to think about people being 200 years. So if I say, what could a double lifespan mean for your business? So currently, typical Australian lifespan is 80 years. Let's say people are living to 150, 160, but just as healthy as they are when they're now living to 80. What does that mean for your business? So the way to do this is you can either click the little red button at the bottom here, or just double click anywhere on the screen and type in your name. So, sorry, not your name, your business type. So I'm a conference speaker. So what that means is people living longer is I have to think more about the lifetime value of my clients, because I might be working with the client for 100 years if that's the case. Okay, so I'm just giving the chance to respond now. So I'll just wait a bit while people are responding. Yeah, interesting. So mentoring and training, millennials don't like training. Yeah. Yeah, but just imagine, how mentoring changes, because mentoring quite often is the traditional version of mentoring is that you learn from people who've got more experience than you. What happens when you've got people who've got 100 years more experience than you have, and vice versa. What are those people who've got those 100 years of experience? What's going to motivate them and what's going to engage them? Maybe they want to learn from people who are 100 years younger than they are. Agricultural extension, landholders will be able to see changes resulting from, changing management practices, learning and development in healthcare. So I think a whole bunch of stuff around the planet. People say we haven't inherited the planet from our ancestors. We're actually the custodians of it for our children. But what if actually we're the custodians of it for ourselves in 100 years? Maybe we'll think differently about the way that we use our resources. Okay, great. Learning and development, healthcare. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to leave you the chance to do that if you want to continue contributing to that. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a chance to just think a little bit differently about something that most people haven't thought about. I don't know whether you've thought about this idea before, but it's just a chance to really get outside our normal comfort zone of thinking about we know what life is going to be like. And this is quite a radical concept. Even among the people who are working in this area of life extension science, is a radical concept for them as well, that there's a lot of debate about whether the technology really is that good, whether some of the predictions are as accurate as they are, whether some people are too optimistic, and then the others who say, no, we're too pessimistic, that we're actually going to get to the point where people could live forever sooner than what other people are predicting. And to me, I'm less interested in whether this is accurate. I am interested in whether it's plausible, and from everything I've seen, it is plausible. But I'm also interested in people thinking about this and what it means for their personal life and for their professional life. And if nothing else, it gives you the chance to get completely outside A, what most people are thinking, and perhaps B, what you're thinking as well. So remember, this is one of those of the disruptors. This is the one that's furthest in the distance. And maybe you think, I'm not going to worry about that too much just yet because I've got bigger problems around here. Just by the way, when I do there's an online survey on my website which helps you identify which of these are the most compelling for you. And most people, their biggest disruptors happen dominators, startups, and upstarts. Oh, and a little bit of randoms as well. So most people are okay with their competitors, and most people aren't thinking about their terminators. But it just gives the chance to maybe have a bit of a competitive advantage if you do think about things which most people aren't thinking about. And that's why I want to talk about this idea today, and not necessarily to get you to believe it, but to get you to think differently about the future and how the future environment is going to affect your business. I often end my presentations by saying, start before you're ready. So even if you don't think that there's any consequences for you, maybe it's worthwhile having a meeting with your mentor or with your team, having this sort of conversations, or maybe even just in your social circles. What's life going to be like if we could live for twice as long, but be as healthy as we are now? So start before you're ready. Don't wait for it to, don't wait until there's a need to do it. Start before the need is there. So as I said, just to finish off, if you complete the exit survey, I'll send you a copy of the article that I wrote for the Financial Planners Association Money and Life magazine. And if you want to talk to me or you want to email me about any further observations, please do email me at gihan@gihanpereira.com. And I do talk about these in my conference presentations. So if you're interested in booking me for a conference to speak about topics like this, then again, you can email me there or find out more at gihanspeaks.com. So thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks for participating. I hope it just opened your mind a little bit and got you thinking a little bit creatively about something that might affect your business today, tomorrow, and it'll definitely affect it sometime in the future. Thanks everyone, and bye for now.